You're listening to the Move IQ podcast, and I'm your host, Phil Spencer, and I'm delighted to be joined again in Season 2 by my friend and co-host, Chris Ducker. This is the place where I'll be sharing my advice, my experience, and lots of tips and tricks on all things property and moving home generally. In this season, we're going to be talking about renting and giving you advice on how to navigate the rental market. So I'm really pleased to be here and I appreciate your time. So without further ado, let's get cracking. Your rented property is more than just the place you live, it's your home. Taking out Legal & General's rental protection plan could help you pay the rent on your home when you can't. Visit legalandgeneral.com/rental protection plan to find out more. Hello everybody, and thank you for tuning in to this, our next episode of the Move IQ Property Podcasts, where we are focusing on rental properties today, and Chris Ducker and I are chatting about, we're going to be talking about how to secure a rental property in today's podcast and how to negotiate it and all things to consider when you're faced with that particular set of challenges.
Now, at the end of episode 2, I kind of alluded to the fact here that a lot of people don't even know that they can ultimately negotiate a rental agreement. But before we go there, maybe we should do a little bit of background research on this property that we're thinking about renting. Phil, how would one go about doing something like that?
Well, I always say information is power, isn't it? In any negotiation, the more intel you have, the more confident you're going to be in your decisions and in your negotiations. So I think it's relevant to know who your landlord is and whether this is a kind of part of a portfolio, in which case they're likely to be very commercial about their decisions, or whether it's a kind of one-off property owned by an accidental landlord or something. It would be interesting for you as a prospective tenant to know how long they've owned the property for and how long it's been rented out for and why is it empty?
Maybe how many past tenants there's been, things like that.
And why did they leave? Were they evicted? Did they leave on their own accord? You know, all these things are, I think, are worth knowing.
Now, let's play devil's advocate here a little bit. Obviously, some of that, a lot of that information, we might have to ask the landlord or maybe the letting agency, if that's the way we're going with this. We're going to have to take a little bit of that at face value. I mean, they could ultimately tell us whatever they thought we wanted to hear. Is there any way for us to really look into it properly? Like, are there any databases that we can search or anything like that?
That's a good question. I mean, my personal advice would be is if you downloaded a Move IQ property report from the website, available at the press of a button. That would give you a lot of information about the property and who's lived in there and for how long, and who has lived in next door and for how long. And I think that adds...
And a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 45-page report, so it is full of useful info.
Actually, on a very serious note, that report has been ordered and downloaded by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people since it became available. I think a lot of people who have probably visited moveiq.co.uk have seen it. They might be thinking about renting, but maybe very possibly they didn't order it because they thought it was only for buyers.
Yes.
So thank you for clearing that up. It's also for renters as well.
Well, it is, because all of those decisions about whether it's the right location and what it's like to live there, and any nuisances that might be around, and people on the street and things like that, it's all relevant.
It doesn't change. It doesn't.
You're setting up a home.
Okay.
And so, yes, you need as much information as possible.
So let's talk negotiating.
Yeah.
Then. How do we what do we negotiate in this sort of type of agreement, and how do we go about doing so?
Well, nothing's set in stone, and I think people are aware that you try and negotiate an asking price off a house when you buy it, but actually it seems that tenants go, well, that's the rent. It's not an asking rent, that's the rent. Do you want it or not? And in a competitive marketplace, that's certainly the kind of image, the feeling that a letting agent will try and give you. And sometimes it is absolutely like that. That's the rent. Do you want it or not? Because if you don't, then the next person will have it. Yeah. Having said that, there are things that are worth negotiating. I mean, it does slightly depend on the agreement the type of agreement that is being offered, but a break clause is very relevant. A break clause relates to the ability of either landlord or tenant to terminate the lease early. Some of these can be landlord only, and some can be tenant only. So I'd encourage people to read the small print.
Yeah. Okay.
Devil's in the detail. So aside from the break clause and whether that benefits the landlord or the tenant or both, obviously you want to have a discussion about the price. You can do your own comparable research, talking to letting agents and using the internet to find out what a fair and reasonable price is. But also there are other things that might be up for discussion. If you want the walls painted, if you want the carpets cleaned or new carpets, or perhaps if you want a bit more storage built in and things like that. So it's not all about the length of the lease and the price of the lease.
Right, okay. A few home comforts, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's I think you're well within your rights, and to say, well, I like the house, but in order for me to pay that level of rent, can you give it a coat of paint?
Yeah.
You know,
Kitchen floor looks like it's been here since 1976. Can we switch it out to something newer?
I think all too often tenants are a bit on the back foot about asking for those things. Ask. It's part of a grown-up discussion.
My dad, and I share a lot of his feedback and advice on this show, because he's my first mentor, my father. He used to say, if you don't ask, you don't get.
You don't get. Yeah.
So true.
My dad always used to say to me, an awful lot of things can go wrong in the world if you own the roof over your head and it not affect you. And that's always stuck with me. And I guess that's probably what gave me the property bias to start with.
Yeah.
Your home is special.
Sage advice from...
Oh, our dads always give us sage
advice. Dads are the best.
Do you reckon we still give our kids sage advice?
Probably not. I think we probably hope that we do. Yes. We wish that we do. Okay, all right. So based on what I know on our conversations privately, there seems to be like more than one tenancy agreement here. There's 3, am I right? 3 different ones that kind of are standard?
Yes. The majority of tenancies in the UK are under assured short hold agreements, or an AST. It's definitely the most common. That's a fixed term between 6 and 12 months. The rent can't increase during that time. At the end of that time, it automatically rolls over into what they call a periodic tenancy. So that counts for the vast majority. Okay. You can also get an AST room-only agreement, which is relevant to sharers and bedsits, where the kind of facilities of the property are shared between mixed tenants. And in that situation, the rent is calculated on a room-only basis.
And that will come down to size of the room? And that sort of, and whether that room is furnished or that room is unfurnished.
Exactly, and they can all be different. Yeah. All the different rooms could be on different levels of rent.
Right.
There's a lodger's agreement, which is perhaps a little bit more informal, but both the landlord and tenant live in the property themselves, and there just has to be some kind of understanding between the two. But that is a legal agreement.
Okay.
There are non-assured hold tenancy agreements, where people have a right to stay until the end of a fixed term, but they have less protection under those situations and about eviction and things like that. It's not particularly common, but they do exist.
Okay, but I would assume very heavily, based on your experience in this world, that regardless of what tenancy agreement we're looking at, there are several things, several bits of advice that you can kind of collate together that are relevant to any and all types of agreements. I'm hoping you've got that. Okay,
well, let me have a go. Have a go.
Yes, let's do it.
Firstly, I'd say read the tenant agreement in full and actually get it early. You know, I've heard several situations of people see a flat they like, they agree a price, everything's sorted out, but actually they don't sign on it. The agent says, right, we'll come pick up the keys a week on Saturday, we'll do the paperwork. So a week on Saturday, with all your stuff in the van, parked outside, you go in and they go, here's the agreement, sign it and you can go. Well, that's not really the time to have a discussion about the ins and outs of that agreement, because if, you're under pressure. So get the agreement early and go through it properly.
Right.
Rather than leave yourself in a pressurized situation and needing to sign it without fully understanding it or fully agreeing with it.
Now, that sounds like a lot of common sense, but you're right. A lot of people just skip it. I think, I found my flat, I'm moving in next week kind of thing.
It's all exciting.
And they don't spend, they don't spend the time to really dot the I's and cross the T's. I bet there's horror story after horror story in that situation.
Actually, there's probably more horror stories on that topic, but there are probably more horror stories about the inventory. Okay. And this is my absolute, if people take nothing else out of this podcast, do pay real care and attention to the inventory. And that is that the inventory, the landlord provides inventory when you move in of what's in the flat and what condition it's in.
Right.
You absolutely need to properly go through that with a fine-tooth comb on the day that you move in. Take pictures, take videos of the condition of things that it is when you're moving in. If it's dirty, take a picture of it. If the bath's not clean, film it. If the sofa's got a rip in it, take a picture of it. Because rest assured, when you move out, you don't want to get in a discussion about, can I have my deposit back, please, Mr. Landlord, Miss Landlord.
I love that. That's gold.
Well, people don't do it, Chris. They don't.
Oh, I haven't.
And then
I've had several properties. I've never done it. Ever.
And that is where you get into big arguments at the end and massive, throwing the toys out of the pram because the landlord won't give you your deposit back. Well, if you didn't go through the inventory to prove that there's a rip in the sofa and the floorboard's loose and the doorbell doesn't work, well, the landlord's going to want some money to repair his flat.
Yeah.
There is allowed wear and tear. You are allowed to live in the property and live in it in the normal way, and there is such thing as a wear and tear.
So what's classed as wear? Is it, are we talking scuffs on the floorboards and that sort of type of stuff? Okay.
That's normal wear and tear.
Right.
But if there is damage created during the time that you live there, and if you didn't read the inventory, it could be there when you move in.
Come back to bite you.
It's going to come back to bite you.
Yeah. Yeah. This is all good stuff. See, this is the reason why I love recording podcasts like this, which are, it's just one level of advice after another. For you guys, let us know what you're thinking of the Move IQ property podcast. You can hop over to moveiq.co.uk, hit us up on all the socials. Just type in Move IQ. You will find us. We'll be back with episode number 4, where we're going to be focusing in on everything you should do when your tenancy actually begins. It's an important one. The inventory's right there as well. Phil, they should definitely stay tuned for episode 4.
Let's hope so. That wraps up this episode of Move IQ's Property Podcast. Whatever podcast app you like to use, please do go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I'd also really appreciate it if you could leave us a review. Reviews massively help other people like you to find us. For free supporting materials, head over to our website, moveiq.co.uk. And thanks again for tuning in.